as a refresher, these reflections are based on 3 sources and 3 sources only. So the first is Ashley M. Wilcox's The Women's Lectionary. If you don't know that, you've not been around long. The second source is the Bible, Seminary Bible. It's been through some stuff. But only the scriptures referenced in the Wilcox book for the given week that we're in within the liturgical calendar. And then the third source is the Spirit, who does what Spirit does, right? So I was a few weeks into this process before I really kind of homed in on the overarching theme, and that is this: to show through Scripture that the way many branches of Christianity view and treat women is not the way of God, the intention of God, nor the heart of God. If you've been considering sharing this series with someone, that's a good one-liner to give them. It sums up, I think, what it is we're trying to accomplish, and I encourage you to use it. So, Huldah. I remember the first time I truly noticed her, and part of that is on me. Let's be honest. Sometimes reading these histories of who was king over what territory for how long, how old they were when they ascended the throne, and why they died, and if they were faithful or not, and what happened to their territories because of that faith or lack of faith, it can get monotonous and just difficult to stay focused. So that part's on me. I'll take that. The other piece of it, though, is that her story just is not told much. So Huldah appears in only 2 passages, the 2 Kings passage listed for today, and then its parallel telling in 2 Chronicles. That's it. This text then, well, both of them, the 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, tend to not appear in lectionaries. Hence, they're not often preached, if ever, right? For a church that is truly lectionary based, this story isn't going to come up. So, then it's left to other places to tell her story. Sunday school, youth group, Bible study, etc. It's a shame that her story doesn't get more airtime. It's not as if what Huldah had to say was any less important than her contemporaries, who, by the way, have their own books. Jeremiah, Zephaniah, looking at you. But from what little we do have, we can glean a truth that bears repeating, even though we've said it week after week. The writer of 2 Kings does not stress or highlight the fact that King Josiah chooses, in this instance, to consult with prophetess Huldah rather than prophet Jeremiah or prophet Zephaniah. What we learn from that is much larger than the seemingly simple oversight or omission. You see, when an author of a biblical book focuses on specific details, there is a reason for it. It should raise a flag when a detail is given to you that is not given always. For instance, some of the kings, we are told of their handsomeness, their beauty, their physical traits, but not all of them. There's a reason for that. Either it is significant to the story at hand, or it reflects something about the person's character. Here, The only indication that Huldah is female is the 3-letter S, ESS, on the end of her title. So why does that matter? Because it tells us that the author felt it unnecessary to highlight it. Not because it wasn't important, but because it just was accepted. From the perspective of the writer, there is nothing unusual about a female prophet, and there is nothing unusual in Josiah choosing her as a source and connection to God. She was one of at least 3 options. He didn't choose her because she was a woman, and he wouldn't have avoided her because she was a woman. She was viewed as a prophet equal to her contemporaries Jeremiah and Zephaniah. She had the direct line to God that Josiah was seeking in this moment. It was accepted truth, and therefore there was no need to call it out. So this begs the question then, why do Christian churches tend not to preach her story with the same frequency, if at all, as those prophets who do have their own book? Now, before you come at me, I do acknowledge that Jeremiah, Isaiah, Jonah, Micah are the most often preached and the most well-known. I get that. And that the others are treated a bit more like Huldah. But here's the difference. Most believers who attended church for some portion of their life could at least say the names of the other prophets who have their own book, right? How many pastors have preached about the prophetesses? It's a fun little word, isn't it? How many Sunday school classes? How many youth leaders? Does anybody talk about her? You see, representation matters even here. Little girls need to know that when they feel the stirring of the Spirit, they don't have to ignore it because the call is genuine and true. Young women deserve to know that their calling is present regardless of the men in their lives. Older women need to trust and know and be affirmed that their wisdom is recognized and valued, and not just for the younger women. Hold on to that for a moment. Remember last week when we talked about the whore of Babylon? That has, of course, since been a metaphor that has since been personified and used to shame and judge women for centuries. Well, this week, we take on the other woman in Revelation. She is also a metaphor, but this also has been used to limit, shape, and judge women. And who is she? The bride. Thanks to mentions of things like perfect, beautiful, pure, made ready, purity culture had all the foundation it felt it needed. There are a lot of problems with this, but today we'll hit just 2 that share the same foundation. First, purity culture is very heavily focused on girls. How they talk, how they dress, how they look at someone. From a young age, pressure is put upon them to not be a temptation to the boys around them because they do not want to be responsible for the falling of said boys. That whole setup gets me just very riled up. So we're going to leave that there. So the second is this. The fact is that this bride is yet another metaphor. It does not refer to one person. It does not refer to a young virgin saving herself for her wedding night as if she is the only one who can know Christ. That's not what this is. And here's the thing. You don't get to pick and choose when to apply certain meanings of a certain passage. So if sometimes you see the bride in Revelation as the church, capital C church, as a whole, then that's what it is. You don't get to then later say, but it's also a call to women to remain pure. Because again, interestingly, that doesn't ever get applied to the boys. Certainly not to the men. Curious, right? Yeah. And just to push the envelope a little bit further, I'll share this tidbit from Wilcox's commentary on this Revelation passage this week. The Greek word, translated spirit, is neither male nor female. It's non-binary. It's a non-binary description of the presence of God. Do with that what you will. I personally love it. You see, none of what I'm doing here, none of what those who take a more liberal reading of Scripture, none of what any of us are doing is about changing what Scripture says to fit the current need of society. That's not what's happening. That's what the fear will teach us. It's what those who fear losing control will preach and push. That's the agenda, right? But that's not what's happening. In fact, in the 32 weeks of this challenge, I hope you see what I see with greater clarity each week. It is about recognizing what has been done to Scripture to fit a supremacist patriarchal society. It is about stripping those things away and looking freshly with a new lens to see in Scripture the messages of love and worth and value and grace that God intended us to see all along. I know there are faith communities out there doing that right now. So if yours isn't and you long to be a part of one, keep looking. Every day, I see more evidence that there remain many who believe the twisted meanings preached to them and who remain unempowered to speak and seek for themselves. Because, to be clear, that is what I hope. I hope not that people will just take in what I'm saying and replace what they've been told before, because that's just swapping out apples for oranges. That's not helpful. My hope is that these weeks continue to empower you to dig into Scripture on your own, to remove all of the old lenses you've been given, and to just read it. Just read it. Notice what isn't there as much as what is, because a lot of what has been done to Scripture, you can't really find it. Not if you know what you're reading. Not if you know how to understand what's there on the page, the words that are used and what they meant when they were used. Notice what isn't there as much as what is. I, for one, will continue until she is called and she is speaking is much more than a catchphrase. It is simple truth. I hope that you'll join me. One of the ways you can join me is by clicking subscribe or liking or commenting or sharing or all of the above. I'm not afraid to ask for that because that's what gets this out there. That's what gets this into the hands of those who can sense within their being that they don't have the full story and just need to know how to get started. If all this does is introduce the possibility that what interpretations people have been hearing from the pulpit throughout their lives is maybe not accurate, is maybe being twisted and misused. If we can cut in that small possibility, the Spirit can take that and run with it. See you next week for Advent 1, favorite season. So excited. And I'll be back here in my new little studio space. I hope you like it. I will see you next week.